Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Let's begin. And welcome everyone to our Transportation Alternatives Program Project Selection Workshop. I'm Doug Cox with PSRC's Transportation Planning Team here along with Mitch Cook and our Program Manager, Jennifer Barnes. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to be here with you today and also excited for the Seahawks Victory Parade tomorrow. Couple housekeeping items before we start. So this workshop is set up as a meeting, not a webinar. So go ahead and raise your hand if you want to ask a question and be ready to turn on your camera and your mic when we call on you. We'll pause periodically to respond to questions, but depending on how many we get, we might need to put some in the parking lot and come back to them at the end of the workshop. If you have any technical difficulties with Zoom, please reach out using the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to help you. And we encourage you to take a look at our Transportation Alternatives Program, our TAP webpage for more information. And lastly, the workshop will be recorded, and we'll post the recording and the slides to that TAP website shortly afterwards today. So for our agenda today, we're going to provide a bit of background on the TAP program. We'll talk about the various requirements to be eligible to participate in this competition, including the screening form process, which is a critical step that needs to be completed prior to responding to the scored project evaluation criteria that we'll also cover. Then we'll go over the schedule of the key milestones in the process, and we'll show you where you can find the detailed resources we have available on our website to help you as you complete your screening forms and applications in case you haven't found those already. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a demo of the online screening form and application. So we'll keep the info at a pretty high level for today, but please let us know if you have questions as we're covering all this over the next hour or so. And to start with our background, so Transportation Alternatives Program, TAP, it's a federal funding program. It's actually 10% of the funds from the Surface Transportation Block Grant are set aside specifically for funding pedestrian and bicycle projects, as well as projects to preserve historic transportation infrastructure and environmental improvements to the transportation system. This competition is awarding funds for fiscal years 2027 and 2028, and we're expecting about $8 million to be available to award for each of those 2 years. And for this competition, sponsors can request up to $4 million per application, and they can submit up to 2 applications per agency. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer to cover the eligibility information in the screening form process. So go ahead, Jennifer.
Thanks, Doug. So I'm Jennifer Barnes. I'm program manager. You can go to the next slide, Doug. I'm program manager here at PSRC. And before I get into more of the details related to TAP, just want to give you a bit of an overview on just our policies related to federal funds. So we do have a policy framework for PSRC's federal funds. This includes very detailed policies for both project selection and project tracking, and they are adopted by our executive board. So we do generally distribute funds from different sources every 2 to 3 years, programmed in the future. And as Doug mentioned, this particular competition is looking to the program years of 27 and 28. But all of our framework is what guides the criteria in our competitions, and these are based on kind of the implementation of our policies as established in Vision 2050. Next, please. Spend a little bit of time. I know our focus today is about kind of what we're asking of you who are requesting funds from this source. But we do have very detailed project tracking process that's also outlined in our project tracking policies. And the whole goal of our project tracking policies are to make sure that projects that receive PSRC funds are delivered in a timely manner and avoid delays. We use the term use it or lose it. When the funds that are allocated to our region have to be spent in the year for which they are allocated. So we have a lot of very detailed procedures in place to kind of monitor once funds are awarded, that projects are on track. We have a number of policies in place for if a project goes off track, but making sure that the scope that was awarded is the scope that's being delivered. We have policies that do accommodate kind of delays if they occur for reasons that are outside of an agency's control. But we do have very specific. This really starts from the time of award, and we do monitor project progress up until the time that the project is completed once PSRC funds are awarded. I will just clarify, we talk about our June 1st obligation deadline. All of our FHWA funds that are awarded have an obligation deadline of June 1st of the year, the program year in which they are awarded. And when we talk about obligation deadline, I just want to clarify what we're talking about. That's the date by which a complete and correct funding authorization package has been submitted to WashDOT. So that's what you have to submit and get signed off on in order to be able to expend those funds. Our deadline of June 1st is set so that we can make sure that WashDOT has time to do everything that they need to do for final signatures well in advance of the end of the fiscal year, because any funds that aren't obligated by the end of that fiscal year basically are lost funds. So we have a lot of policies and procedures in place to manage that, to track progress, and to make adjustments as needed as time goes on. But I do want to just really emphasize that our intent is for the funds that are awarded are the funds that kind of get spent on kind of what the grant application said and in the year that those funds were awarded. Next, please. So TAP, here are the eligible activities for TAP funds, and this really is the most, I would say, restrictive of all of the potential FHWA funding sources. So the three categories are listed here, and eligible activities are improvements truly to bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Some examples listed here, but say a larger project that maybe has transit or vehicle lane improvements in addition to pedestrian and bicycle would not be eligible for TAP. That they really need to be dedicated to bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And then with historic resources and environmental projects, there the hook is that they are related to transportation. And so that's part of what we'll be checking in our eligibility reviews to make sure that the scope of the project fits into one of these categories. Next, please. Here's a list of the sponsors that under the federal rules are eligible to apply for TAP funds, various agencies, school districts, and nonprofit. Regardless, there is a requirement that any sponsor either has certification acceptance, and this is actually described in more detail on a later slide, so I will wait for that to give you more information. But the main thing here is that the sponsor if the sponsor doesn't have this status, then they need to enlist. If the project sponsor doesn't have this status, they need to enlist an agency that does have it. So I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Next, please. Here are other eligibility requirements that we are checking for. So just all of the scope that I just talked about. Everything else listed here are pieces of our screening forms that I'm going to get into more detail. So I won't spend the time reading the list here, but there's a number of things, as you're about to hear from me over the next several slides, that we need to check for in our eligibility screening. Next, please. So the major components for all applicants to this process there's two pieces or two kind of waves of information that we ask you to fill out. The first is the screening form. That process is underway right now. And the information on the screening form really is just key descriptive information about the project that we need to know to confirm its eligibility. So that's really the information. It's not why the project is justified or what the benefits are, but it's really here's the description of our project and here's how this project meets all of the kind of list of bullets that were on that previous slide that I'm going to talk about shortly. Once we review that, we have opportunity, the sponsors have opportunity to make corrections or clarifications as part of that screening form process, but it has to be done in order to be able to move forward into the funding application, which includes all of the same information in the screening form, but that is where the evaluation criteria questions are. And that, even though that's, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the non-scored eligibility part, but then the funding application will then also include those criteria questions that applicants need to answer and that are scored for the competition. Next, please. So now I'm going to spend a fair amount of time just walking through the different pieces of the screening form. So the purpose, as I mentioned, is to verify the eligibility of a project to be awarded PSRC funds prior to completion of the full grant application. And the purpose of this is it's a lot of information, but it takes a lot of time, and we know, and effort to complete a good grant application. So we want to make sure that the eligibility, any questions regarding eligibility have been answered and confirmed prior to an applicant spending the time to then answer all of those questions, those criteria questions. So that is built into our deadline. There is a deadline for this competition of February 27th, by which the screening form needs to be submitted. And then it needs to be approved by PSRC prior to submitting the full funding application. And this is my first opportunity to guide you or direct you to the screening form checklist and guidance, which is a resource listed on that is linked on our website. And just really can't emphasize enough how important it is to use this document. It really does walk through all of the pieces of the screening form. It provides links to other resources where they're needed, provides contact information if you have a question. So we've put a lot of effort, our staff, into trying to align this guidance with the actual layout of the form itself. And so it's really intended to be a resource that you can use to help you get all the information you need as you're completing this form. Next, please. So this slide has a lot of words, and so I'll just tell you in essence. I've already mentioned some of these things, but in the screening form, sponsor provides all of the key eligibility information that we need to know. Once it's submitted, PSRC staff reviews the screening form in all of these eligibility categories, and either reaches a determination that in all or some categories the project meets eligibility requirements, or if there are areas where there's a question or clarification needed, then we would return that to the sponsor as a comment. So we do need the sponsor to work with us to make sure that comments are fully resolved, updated back into the screening form again. Once it's been submitted, we can re-release it for update if there's corrections that need to be made or clarifications. And then once comments have been adequately addressed, we will confirm that, and then you are free to submit your application at any time after that. The way our system is set up, and Mitch and Doug are going to get into this more than me, but it will be possible for you to submit your screening form. And if you want to kind of get ahead on your criteria questions, the system will allow you to do that. But just be warned that until you get that approval from PSRC, you are proceeding at your own risk. We really do need to have that final eligibility confirmed prior to submittal. But that is an option that you have if you want to get started while we're in the process of confirming the screening form information. All right. So for those of you who've done this before, we have some updates, but they're more in process than in content. The information that we're asking for in the screening form has not changed from prior competitions. It's all the same information that we always ask for TAP competitions. The thing that has changed is that the project readiness and financial plan, all of the financial information that used to be a scored category in our competitions, including TAP, a couple of years ago that got changed from a scored criteria from scored criteria to eligibility criteria. That's why the whole rigorous process outlined on the previous slide, it was put into place. So basically it's saying if these particular readiness and financial plan, they need to be adequately communicated that they're meeting all of our guidelines. And I'll talk more about both of these shortly prior to moving forward with the funding, with the full funding application. And the purple is just repeating what I've already said, that they do need to be resolved and completed in the project application, updated in the project application before that full application is submitted. Next. So now I'm just going to walk through the general information that we ask for in the screening form. The first seems pretty obvious, project title, description, and location. The point that I want to emphasize here, particularly in the project description, is that what we ask here is that you be very clear and concise. The project description really should just be a description of the scope of the project. What are we doing? We don't need at this point, and it actually kind of makes it harder to review if you put a lot of justification and benefits in the project description. There'll be plenty of room for that in the evaluation criteria, but what we want here is this clear description of what the project will actually do. Certification acceptance, that's or CA status, that's what I was referring to earlier. This is a designation that is given by WashDOT, and it basically indicates that the agency has demonstrated to WashDOT understanding of all the federal rules regarding project development and administration for any projects that are federally funded. So there are extra requirements that go with federally funded projects. So for any agency that doesn't have CA status, and there is a link in our guidance to WashDOT's website that lists all the agencies that have it. For agencies that don't have it, the requirement is that a CA sponsor must be enlisted. And often, if it's a smaller town, it might be the county, it might be WashDOT, as often as WashDOT. But in that case, we do require that confirmation from the sponsor who has been identified also be provided, confirming that they have that they're aware that they have been designated a sponsor and that they are willing and able to serve in that role. And this is not uncommon, I guess, and you can stay on this slide, but especially for smaller agencies, we do have often a number of agencies that don't have CA status. Just makes it very important that that agency identify a CA sponsor and get that agreement. Okay, now I'm ready for the next. The next category is plan consistency, and that we look at that at two levels. First is consistency with the regional transportation plan. Primarily, we're looking for if it's a project that meets our threshold for a regional capacity project. It needs to be listed explicitly in our current plan's regional capacity project list. I think many of you are aware that we are undergoing our review or our update of our regional transportation plan with a new version being adopted in this May. For as of right now, for the purposes of this competition, the 2022 plan is the adopted plan, and so that's the one that we'll be looking at. I think this is probably we have fewer regional capacity projects that we find in our review of TAP projects. The threshold is pretty high for a bicycle pedestrian project to be considered a regional capacity project, but that is something that we need to check. And if it does meet the threshold, that it is on the list. For any project that doesn't meet the threshold for a regional capacity project, as long as the scope and the purpose of the project is consistent with our regional policies, we consider that programmatic, and even though it's not explicitly listed in the RTP, that it is considered to be consistent with the RTP. The local plan consistency indicates that a project needs to be in or consistent with a PSRC certified city or county comprehensive plan. So as of right now, they can be conditionally certified. But these are the plans that we're holding this to now are the plans that were required for update in 2024. So the project must also be, if the project is overlapping with other jurisdictions, like something on a state facility, The project also needs to be consistent with kind of whatever other jurisdiction it overlaps with. So we're looking for, sometimes they're explicitly listed, sometimes there's policies that can be pointed to that support the plan, but we are looking for that consistency with local plans as well. Next, please. The next category that we look for is federal functional classification. So if a project is located on a roadway, it must be part of the approved federal functionally classified system, meaning that it's on a road that is classified collector or above. The designations that we're looking for are the actual adopted by FHWA classifications. Sometimes cities have their own version of classifications, but it's the federal functional classification that comes to play here. We do have a link in our guidance to WashDOT's website that shows all of the current system of federally functionally classified roads. There are exemptions to certain project types where they're located that are listed here. So that's also an option if your project meets one of these. And in TAP, often we have a bicycle or pedestrian project. Many exempt projects in the TAP competition, but that's something that we would be checking for as well. And then just to note that funds can be requested for a project on a roadway that is not yet classified, but is planned to be added to the functionally classified network. If funds are awarded to a project of that type or in that situation, they can be programmed in the TIP, but the jurisdiction has to complete the actual process that is submitting an application, going through an approval process, and getting FHWA approval prior to obligating those funds. Next, please. This is a category which is, I think, pretty easy for most of the TAP projects since they are bicycle and pedestrian projects largely in those other categories as well. But we do have federal rules that we need to follow that requires that we ask for identification of existing non-motorized facilities in the project area, and then also a listing of whatever bicycle and pedestrian facilities are included in the project scope. If there are none, there's a list of kind of reasons that can be pointed to of why there aren't, but that's just a requirement that we have that goes with federal funds. So that's why we ask those questions, and generally with TAP competition, it's a fairly easy question to answer. But if you have any questions about that, you can let us know. Next, please. Okay, project readiness. This is a big one. It's a big part of our review. And the question that we are trying to answer here is, will the project, to the best of everybody's knowledge, be ready to use PSRC funds by the requested date? So we have questions that are about the project schedule. And what we're looking for is a demonstration that the milestones of the project schedule are sufficient to allow the project to deliver on time. So if a project is, say, requesting construction funds in 2028, we need to know all of the milestones leading up to that 2028 construction date so that we can determine that the project schedule is realistic and that those funds could realistically be expected to be obligated by that date. So understanding just the prerequisites that apply to the project is very important, and we ask very specific questions about schedule, and we do look for realistic completion dates. And we have developed this as we really beefed this up when we changed project readiness from a score to an eligibility criterion, and we developed some guidelines that we go by and that are we can show you on the following slide here. So this is small print for a slide, but this is also in a link to this is in our guidance. But this is just a flow chart full of yes and no questions that we ask the sponsor, that we go through when we determine kind of the minimum time between phases. And so when I'm talking about phases, design, right away if it's needed, and construction. And so based on the answers to these questions, a lot have to do with where the project is in its NEPA process. That tends to be a very strong factor in some types of projects regarding their timeline and then also permitting and right-of-way needs. So going through the yes or no questions in this flow chart, the green boxes lead to the minimum time between phases, design, right away, and construction that we are looking for, kind of based on just trends that we've seen over the years. We did put these timelines together in consultation with WashDOT staff, kind of based on their experience with project schedules for these local agency projects as well. I think we can go to the next slide. Yes. So we're asking you to use this flow chart as your starting point. If a project is on a tighter timeline than our guidelines indicate, that isn't a deal breaker in and of itself, but we then do want to hear the kind of the specific circumstances that would justify a shorter project timeline. So we review those. The first thing we check if the project's schedule meets our minimum timeline guidelines, then we don't really question it further. If the schedule is tighter than our minimum guidelines, we then review the reason for that. We may almost usually would circle back to the sponsor and just to make sure we have complete clarity on kind of what the situation is. And this is one where we could, if there's still questions, we would consult with WashDOT. So we're just trying to, the best of everybody's ability, make sure that projects schedules are as realistic as possible so that we can be as comfortable as possible that the funds will be ready to be obligated in the year they are requested. And then I have a purple reminder here at the bottom of the slide that assuming a longer schedule and not needing it, there is typically some accommodation in our processes for that. If you have funds awarded and programmed for a later year and are ready to go earlier than that, each year when we go through our what we call our rebalancing process to kind of make sure that our delivery is even with what our federal targets are, we do provide opportunity for projects to advance funds from future years to the current year. So overestimating a schedule, that this is an option that is generally available for projects each year. And this is the last piece of the screening form, but this is the financial information that we review. So just going through the funding request, there's only one phase can be requested. And that whatever the phase is being requested, the amount that's being requested for TAP funds, that in combination with all other identified funding is adequate to fully fund the phase. We cannot partially program an awarded phase in the TIP. So we're looking to make sure that the phase would be fully funded and that also that the local match is at least 13.5% of the total phase cost. That is a requirement, a federal requirement, and something that we also double check when we're going through review the screening form. We also need financial documentation that shows that in combination with the funds that are requested, that basically the match funds are all either secured or reasonably expected. And secured is we've got this in our TIP or our CIP already, and we can show that here's the project and here's the funds. We've already gone through the steps to make sure that this is in our budget. That is what we would consider secured. We know that often, especially for requests into the future, a project might not have gotten to that point yet where it's actually programmed in the local TIP. So that's where reasonably expected comes in. That generally is requiring that sufficient budget information to show that we do have a source of funds that would cover our match or all of our required match for this project. And then we require kind of what the steps and the timing would be for securing those funds. We have very detailed guidance on both secured and reasonably expected, what we're looking for in our financial constraint guidance. And that's anybody who's worked on a TIP, it's the same information that we ask for when we're programming your TIP funds. So we have that guidance available on our website, and also, there's a link on the call page and staff who can answer questions about that. I'd say financial documentation and project readiness are probably the areas where we spend the most of our staff time kind of making sure everything is square. Another point about the financial information that we request is that we do need information for the full estimated budget for the project, including all, if it's secured or anticipated funding sources. If it's a future, like say you are requesting PE, we would still need the cost for right of way and construction phases, those estimates. We're not looking for secure and financial or reasonably expected funds for phases that are kind of beyond the year, the phase that's being requested, but we do still need that budget information. But any funding that is needed to get to and then implement the funds that are being requested, that's where we have that's where we require the financial documentation. So that's a lot, and I'll just pause here and see if anybody has any questions before we move on to the criteria, but we do have very detailed guidance and so just emphasize again to make sure that you take advantage of that when you're going through your screening form.
And Jennifer, I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
All right. Well, I think I'm handing it back to you, Doug.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. And yeah, so for this next section, I'll cover the evaluation criteria. And so these are those components that are reviewed and scored for this competition after we confirm all those eligibility details in the screening form that you'll provide first that Jennifer just covered. And we will provide email confirmation that your screening form information is complete and that you're okay to proceed with completing and submitting the full application after any comments we provide on your initial screening form are resolved. So this slide shows how the points are allocated. There's 100 total possible points, and there's two parts. The first applies to all projects, regardless of which of the three categories your project falls into. So that's the support for centers criteria, which is worth 30 of the total 100 points. And then the second part that you'll respond to depends on the type of project that you are submitting. So they're all weighted equally and account for the remaining 70 points. And once we get to the application demo, Mitch will show you where you select which option so you see the appropriate questions to respond to. So that first scored criteria component asks how your project supports the development of centers and the transportation corridors that serve them. As I'm sure many of you are aware, this is a key policy focus area for PSRC, and these criteria questions are intended to help implement the policies of Vision 2050 and the Regional Transportation Plan. For the TAP competition, centers are defined to be regional centers, our regional growth centers, as well as our manufacturing industrial centers, plus centers that are designated through countywide planning processes and local centers, as long as it's a center that's identified in the applicable comprehensive plan. And the questions that we ask here are how the project will support the existing and planned housing and or employment for the center, and how the project will support the development objectives and goals of the center. So here we're looking for you to clearly explain what the comprehensive plans say about the goals and objectives for the center, and then how those goals and objectives will support people and jobs, and then how that your project will contribute to those. So for example, perhaps the comp plan has a goal of making the center more walkable. You would demonstrate that your project that's building some sidewalks on a corridor, connecting a new housing complex directly to that center would be able to help reach that goal. Or maybe the comp plan has a goal of preserving the historic character of the center. You could explain how your project to rehabilitate the historic transit station located in that center would help advance that goal. We just want to see a clear connection between the project and the goals for that center, and that they're articulated in the comp plan, what those goals are. And so once you complete that first part of the application, you'll get to the point where you select the specific category of project that will determine which questions you respond to. And so if you have a pedestrian and bicycle project, the next set of questions you'll respond to are about circulation, mobility, and accessibility. And there's 5 questions here worth a total of 42 points. First one asks how the project adds to, extends, or completes the pedestrian and bicycle system. Responses should specifically identify any existing facilities and demonstrate how the project will connect them to more destinations or make a new connection that's currently not available. And then next we ask how it addresses a specific need that's been identified in the community and how it reduces barriers for people. So for example, maybe your project will enable more types of people to ride bikes by adding a new all ages and abilities facility, or adds an accessible connection that gets around a steep slope, those kinds of things. And then we have a question about the transit connections to the project. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, improving access to transit is a key focus of the regional transportation plan. So we want you to describe the specific transit stops and stations that the project will help get people to and from. And the more routes and the higher capacity of the transit services and the more people it will serve, the better for this question. The fourth question is where you describe the expected amount of use that the project will see and the types of people that will be using it and why. So, for example, here, a project might connect a retirement community with a medical center and shopping and other services, or maybe it'll serve students living near a college campus and make it easier for them to get to their classes. So with this, the more types of user groups that will benefit and the more types of places that they can get to, the better the response will be. And then the last question for this section is if there would be a lost opportunity if the project is not funded. Like there are several new housing projects coming online, and this project will help fill a gap that would otherwise exist in the pedestrian network. So there'd be a missed opportunity to create a walkable connection. That's the kind of thing that we want you to point out in your responses to this one. So those are the circulation, mobility, accessibility questions. Those are kind of like those core transportation aspects of your project that we're looking for. And then the next component will be community support. This accounts for 10 points. And here's where we'll ask you to identify which population groups the project will serve and describe any disparities or gaps in the transportation system that the population is experiencing and how the project will improve it. And we also ask about the outreach process. We want you to describe it and point out any specific communication you have with the population group that are identified, and really importantly, like how it influenced the project characteristics, like the location or the scope, those kind of things. And then the last component for the pedestrian and bicycle category is safety. It accounts for the remaining 18 points. And we first ask you to describe the safety issues that the project will address. So we want to know if there's like a specific existing safety or security issue, or if there's an anticipated issue emerging. And then we'll also ask you to describe how the project will improve conditions for people walking, riding bikes, and any other vulnerable users of the transportation system. And this is a place where data can really help paint the picture. You could point out things, point to things like crash data or speed and volume data, and convey how the project will separate people from motor vehicle traffic in space or time and remove or reduce potential conflict points. And then there's a question about how the project will reduce reliance on enforcement and or design for decreased speeds. You'll want to identify the project's features like traffic calming, median islands, improved signage or signals, or really any aspects of your project that could help reduce speeds. And then lastly, for the pedestrian and bicycle category, we ask if the project is tied to the agency's adopted safety plan or any specific safety policies. And if it is, what those policies are exactly and how those will inform the project. So that covers pedestrian and bicycle. The next is historic resources. So if you have a historic resources project, there's 7 questions to respond to after those support for centers questions. We first ask you to describe the historic significance of the facility. So tell us what makes it a historic exactly, like, and if it's designated at some level as a historic landmark, like on a local, state, or national registry, or is it in a designated historic district? The example shown here, the Fremont Bridge, it's built in 1917. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's also a designated city landmark. So that would be a great example. Then you'll describe how the project relates to the broader historic preservation plans for the area. So if there's a long-term plan for preserving the historic resources in your jurisdiction, like how does this project fit in with those plans? And since this is TAP and these are FHWA funds, as Jennifer said earlier, there has to be that connection between the project and the transportation system. So the next question is where you explain the current or former transportation use of the facility. And there's got to be that nexus to transportation. And so, for example, in my community where I live, there's a project underway right now to rehabilitate the old armory building. Now, that would not be eligible, but say there was a project to rehabilitate the old Greyhound bus terminal. That probably would be eligible given the transportation use of the building. Next, we ask about the plans for the facility after the project is completed and how that fits into the larger transportation system in the area. So rehabilitating a historic facility that moves a lot of people each day, like the Fremont Bridge would be a great example. So it's going to be rehabilitated and then put back into service to keep moving people back and forth for another 100 years. And then the fifth question is similar to those community support questions in the ped bike category. So we ask you to identify the different groups of people in the project area and to what extent they can access the project. So we want to know if it's something that's free and open to everyone versus, something with an admission charge that might limit who can use it. And then we ask about the long-term maintenance plans for the facility. So once the project is complete, will there be enough resources available in the future to keep up with maintaining it? We actually want you to provide documentation about what that commitment is to maintain it into the future. And then lastly, and again, this is similar to one of the earlier questions, but it's about that loss of opportunity if the project is not funded. So we're going to ask that for all of these different categories. And then, so the last category here is environmental. And so if you have an environmental project, there's 5 questions to respond to after that support for centers section. The first is about how the project relates to the transportation system. Again, since it's TAP, there needs to be that connection to transportation and the benefit there. So something like daylighting a creek as part of the redevelopment of a transit station would have that clear connection to transportation versus, daylighting a creek in a park would probably not. Then we ask about the different groups of people in the project area and to what extent they can access the project. The third question is about how well the project goes over and above the environmental mitigation that might normally be required. Like if the project provides additional flood control or provides other benefits like additional safety benefits, whatever they might be. We want to know kind of how it goes above and beyond. And then next one here, similar to the historic preservation question, we ask about the long-term maintenance plans for the project, and we want you to demonstrate how the project will be maintained into the future. And then again, with the other 2 categories, we ask about that loss of opportunity if this project's not funded. So here, for example, maybe there's a prime window to make the environmental improvement while some other construction work is happening. And if that window is missed, it would be much costlier to do that project later. And that would be a really good thing to point out here. So that covers the scored evaluation criteria for all the categories. Do we have any questions before we move on to the next component here?
Don't see any questions.
Okay, great. Guess we're covering everything really clearly. So next, I guess I'll hand it over to Mitch. She's going to talk about the schedule for this competition and some other parts too. Go ahead, Mitch.
Thank you. Doug, can you move the slide, the next one? Thanks. So I'm going to talk about the schedule for the TAP process. As you all probably know, the call was released on February 2nd. Today is the 10th. We're having the TAP workshop. And then the next notable date is February 27th. So this is when the eligibility screening forms are due to PSRC. We are reviewing them as they come in on a first come, first served basis. And the goal of that is to get them back to you in a timely manner so you have time to start working on our comments to your screening forms. So how we're doing this is we'll send you essentially a PDF or a document showing the comments we have for your screening form. These need to be um, edited and uh, fixed before we can grant you access to, or sorry, allow you to submit the application for your project. Essentially, we don't want people to think that these are just suggestions. They need to be, our comments need to be addressed and incorporated into your grant application to ensure that the project will actually be eligible or competing in this process, the TAP process. So we will send out or send back our comments to you all. You will be able to edit your screening form, or sorry, let me back up. You'll be able to respond and ensure that you answered our questions adequately, and we will give you the green light to complete your actual grant application. Um, so, and at that point, you can enter the grant application portal again and submit the application to us for our scoring review. And then going back to the actual schedule piece, we will have all the comments for screening forms returned to all sponsors by March 16th. And then at that, and then again, this is ongoing, so you most likely will get comments before March 16th, but that's the absolute deadline for us. And then once you have time to look over those comments and can address them, and PSRC gives you the green light saying your responses to our concerns are accurate and adequate to move forward to apply or submit the grant application. We'll have sponsors submit their grant applications, which are due by April 3rd to PSRC. At this point, PSRC will be just scoring those grant applications. And then once the scoring is done, we will convene the project selection committee to review these and make recommendations on which projects will receive funding. These meetings are scheduled for May 20th with a possible second meeting on the 21st if we don't get through all of the projects discussion. Once this happens, we PSRC's TPV will release the project recommendations for public comment and eventually to the executive board for final approval in July. For projects that have been chosen for funding, PSRC staff will work with those sponsors of those projects in July and August to program them into the statewide TIP. Sorry, that was a lot of information, but that is the full schedule. If there's any questions, we can pause here. Okay. Oh, yes, Gunnar.
Yeah, what is our obligation date if we receive funding?
It would be June 1st for the relevant year. So what, 2027 or 2028, right? Yeah. So
Okay.
depending on which year, we would list as June 1st, which we would do that anyways automatically on our end.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, if there's no other questions on the schedule, Doug, can you go to the next slide, please?
Actually, we have a question in the Q&A. I'll just read it real quick.
Go ahead.
If we're doing a complete corridor, complete street road diet from a 5-lane road to a 3-lane with separated bike lanes, is a grind and overlay as part of the project an eligible TAP expense so we can start from a clean slate? Given the amount of restoration needed due to plan improvements, we're concerned about a patchwork of old and new pavement.
I will answer this question because it does come up. The answer is kind of it depends, and this is why we really scrutinize TAP scopes in particular, the way that's acceptable is if it's really clearly kind of what we call an ancillary improvement to the bike and to the bicycle improvement. So I think this is one where if that's the scope, we would circle back to the sponsor and just kind of confirm the kind of the project components. A grind and overlay in and of itself would not be eligible for TAP funds. If you have to remove pavement to replace it for a bike lane, generally that would be eligible, but there's a lot of it depends. If and this actually could be one that maybe we would check with WashDOT just to be sure, because once they are awarded and we've gone through all of our, put through our paces to confirm eligibility, WashDOT's doing the same thing, because ultimately we all need to be able to assure FHWA that these are truly eligible. So I think anything that can be credibly described as ancillary to the bike and ped, I think we generally have been able to fund, but if it's kind of in the same project but not specifically related to bike ped, then there's a chance that we would not be able to confirm that is eligible.
Thanks, Jennifer. Looks like we have a question from Mohammed right now too. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for scheduling this webinar. My name is Mohammed from CDF CTEC. Actually, my question is related to the funding allocation that is considered for each year, considering that the project starts on 27 and 28. But what if a project construction phase starts on mid-2028? So is this still being considered as an eligible project in this screening review, or how it's been considered?
You would need to look at the funds, the obligation date. So a project, you need to kind of work backward from when the construction is scheduled. So if it would work for funds to be obligated in 27, but there is a window, between the completion of obligation and the project going out to add. But the funds, absolutely, the obligation deadline is June 1st. Now, the obligation can start starting at the beginning of the fiscal year. So the June 1st is the latest that funds could be obligated, but say for a project with 2028 funds, those could be obligated as early as, or at least submitted for obligation as early as October of 2027, because the 2028 fiscal year starts in that previous October. That's a good question, and we definitely want the project sponsors to be thinking that through of like, here's the timeline of my project, and then just knowing that those funds need to be obligated sometime between October of 20, like in the case of 2028, sometime between October 27 and June 1st of 2028, then it seems like probably you could make that work.
Thank you.
Okay, great question. Not seeing any others right now. Okay, Mitch, back to you.
Thanks. So I will briefly show the actual webpage, but this is just part of the screenshot. So we have a webpage regarding the TAP process on our website. This includes obviously access to the screening form and application, but also a lot of the resources and guidance that we expect sponsors to review before actually completing the screening form and application. So this includes obviously the eligibility information, the project evaluation criteria that we're using, and the financial constraint guidance, as well as checklists for both the screening forms and the applications. Doug, I think I can take it over from here, or take the screen over from here now. That works for you.
Go for it. Yeah, you should be able to.
Mhm. Okay. Cool. So this is the TAP web page that I mentioned. So the most important piece that I was getting at is this drop-down menu, which shares or which includes all of the kind of documents I was just talking about: the schedule, TAP eligibility, evaluation criteria, financial constraint guidance, the screening form checklist and guidance, as well as the application checklist and guidance. To access the screening form link, you'll need to open this guidance document slowly, I guess. And we have the application link, screen form application portal link here. So that. And then your username will, or sorry, your credentials will be the same as your web app user information. However, there will be a number sign at the end of the password just because of the password requirements for FormSite, which is the site that we're holding the application on. So once you log in theory, you won't have anything that's pending, and you would just like start new. I prepared some example applications and screening forms just for the purpose of this tutorial. But essentially, this is showing that these are incomplete screening, or this is an incomplete screening form that's saved. So you all will have the option to do this. You can go through the screening form and save it and leave FormSite and log back in at another time, and then you'll be able to edit where you left off. So that's what I'm doing here. So this is the first page of the screening form. So our screening form and grant application are technically one large application. At the beginning, you will, of course, only be focused on completing the screening form. Once we being PSRC have approved that you've responded to our comments and fixed any issues we saw and flagged in your screening form, you'll be able to go back into this into FormSite, and you'll have your screening form there pending, like incomplete. So you can edit it, and then at that point you'll toggle this to grant application and move through the application to fill out the grant application components and submit it, versus having to fill out a whole new form. So essentially, any of the information included in the screening form will be included in the grant application. So you won't have to enter a lot of the information that or you won't have to enter any of the information that you've already entered for the screening form. So it saves you a lot of time. Anyways, you will select the screening form, hit next, and then throughout this, you'll be able to save progress or go back to, if you need to fix something. This, again, just allows you to get to the resource document, checklist and resource document easily if you need that and don't have it open already. Also, I just wanted to make a small note that it shows the total number of page numbers throughout the application. As you go through the screening form, the pages will skip around a bit, and that's on purpose because certain pages are only relevant to the grant application component. So if you notice that, don't be alarmed. So the first part, general project information. This is pretty straightforward. We're asking for project title. If the project has a regional transportation plan ID, so if it's a capacity project, it would have this. We have, and throughout the application, we have links related to guidance for certain questions that we felt it was necessary to include. Lead agency certification acceptance status. If it doesn't, you would hypothetically list your sponsor here, and we will want a letter or email or some sort of concurrence from that agency included in your application or your screening form in this case that verifies that agency is aware that and accepts the CA status. This asks for contact information for the main, the primary contact and alternative contact, or alternate. This is more project information, so we're looking for the scope, the location information, as well as the identifying the center that the project is serving. This is asking for the federal functional classification based on WashDOT's classification, which can be found here. And throughout the screening form and grant application, we do mention specific staff members to contact if you have a question regarding that specific question. So definitely feel free to contact those staff members if you're stuck. At this point, we have the bike and ped facilities. These are several questions asking what already exists, what will exist, and the scope. And so these are just check boxes. And then there's a question of whether, this question asks if there's no new bike ped elements being added to or within the project's scope, like why is that essentially, like what exemption is allowing that to be the case. Then we ask about local plan consistency. This question changes based on whether you say yes or no, and just a text box to answer. Then we get into project readiness, and this is just some helpful text to kind of remind you all what we're looking for in this section. So this is like a pretty, this is kind of the larger sections of the screening form and grant application. They'll go through questions regarding the PE phase, the project, or sorry, the environmental documentation phase, or information, the right-of-way phase, as well as the construction phase, and then this piece is just other considerations. So hypothetically, if your project readiness, the timeline is less than, or essentially is allowing less time than what our minimum timeline suggestions in this document are suggest, then we would want basically your reasoning as to why that still works for this project in your specific circumstance, or if we need to reevaluate the timeline in general. And then this is the point at which you'll put the information in regarding the funding or the PSRC funding request for the actual TAP funds. So in this example, I'm requesting 2027 construction funds and $1,000 worth of them. We ask if this project has previously received funds. I said yes, and we put the TIP ID here. And just note that we expect a local match funds of 13.5% of this amount. Obviously, you can have more than that, but the bare minimum is 13.5% of the requested amount for the construction phase in this case. And then we are asking about the project cost and schedule here. So we're looking at all the funding costs, or sorry, all the costs for the project for all phases, not just the phase you're requesting funds for. So in my example here, I included the budget, essentially the cost for the project, also PE phase. And then we also, so this is each line item of the budget. So in this case, I did 5310 TAP, the previous funded amount, and local funds. You can hit calculate and that will sum the totals here. And then we also ask for the schedule. So when we actually, or when the sponsor actually expects the completion of this phase. And then again for right-of-way and construction, so this is the phase I'm requesting TAP funds for. So I'm listing the status as unsecured because they have not been awarded yet. I have more than enough local funds secured to match this. And again, calculated the total, listed the expected completion date. I have nothing in other because there's no other phase for my project. And then this again calculates the total cost for all phases and the completion date of the whole project. This page is asking for financial documentation for the project. So we are looking for documentation that shows that the sponsor agency has the ability to fund this project based on the funds they listed here. So we're looking for essentially all of these funds to be documented here. We have this link that's also on the web page that explains more in detail of what kind of documents we are looking for. And then you can describe the documents here and then attach them here. Local CIPs are common, or local tips. TEISs, more specific to WashDOT. And then we also look at budget levels if projects are expected to use funds from a certain budget bucket within the city or the sponsor's budget. We look at the levels to ensure that that amount of funding exists in that budget. But again, this is explained in more detail in this link or in this document. At this point, we're essentially at the end of the screening form. So you'll hit next here and then click submit. So we'll do this. At this point, a PDF copy is sent to the sponsor as well as PSRC staff. So we're aware that the screening form has been submitted. So what will happen here is PSRC staff will do our initial review of your screening form. We will send back our comments on it that will need to be addressed in order for sponsors to ensure that they are eligible for the grant or for the TAP competition. So if you receive comments that need to be fixed, you'll essentially email PSRC staff, it'll be me, and say, okay, here's problem A, this is my solution. PSRC staff, we will respond and say, yes, that resolution works for us. You're now eligible. Please complete a grant application. Doug, can you make sure that I can go back in and show the grant application?
Yes, and Mitch, if you want to pull that up, I'll you can show kind of the before and after of what it looks like. I'll be ready
Okay.
for you.
Okay, so right now, this is the screening form I just submitted. It's showing as complete, so I can't edit it. But once PSRC has reviewed we will switch it back to incomplete, which will allow you to edit it again. So we have to do that manually on our part, which is what Doug's doing for me on the back end. But I'm just logging back out because I'm not sure if it'll update while I'm logged in.
Should be all set.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now it's back to the incomplete status, so I can go back in and edit. So we'll say the screening form looked good. There were no edits that needed to be made. PSRC deemed the screening form eligible to move forward to the grant application. So all I do at this point, so all my information is saved from the screening form, just to show you. So all I'll do here is switch to grant application. So now this form is essentially a grant application. And I go through, all of this information will be saved. It can be
pause you for a
edited.
second, Mitch?
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to pipe in. If there are corrections or updates that need to be made to the screening form, it's basically the same process. It's just that you'd go back into screening form instead of grant application. Just wanted to make
Yeah.
that clarification.
Yes. Thank you. So, sorry. So in theory, all the information will be the same if there were no requested edits from PSRC.
Sorry, Mitch, quick question, but we
Yeah.
can, like, if our budget changes a little bit or something like that, we can we can change that information between the screening form and the final application.
Yeah, I mean, we would want the most accurate as long as you're still providing adequate financial documentation.
Perfect.
So you're saying if it changed, I guess it would be kind of within a month.
Yes, between the screening form and when the full application is due.
The screening form information should not be changed once we've confirmed that everything is good to go. So if there is a change, if you put information in your screening form that's basically been approved by PSRC, and then in the process of your application, you want to change something, you should definitely talk to us before you do that, because the expectation is that we've kind of vetted all of the eligibility information, and these are all description, none of these are subjective information. It should just be kind of the facts of the project that are in the screening form.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, Jennifer. I guess in theory, it would be a pretty short window for there to be a change from us reviewing and then to submitting the application. Oh, sorry. I was waiting for Jennifer to respond.
I think, Liz, did we answer your question? I guess maybe we'll confirm.
Yeah, I think it's more like if we, there's minor scope or minor budget like changes, but we'll cross that bridge if it happens and stay in touch with you.
Yeah, I would say in that case, reach out to us. I mean, once
Oh.
the application is submitted, the application is submitted. But yeah, I think my answer is always it depends on things. But in general, we are expecting kind of the screening form. Once we've reviewed it and kind of confirmed, yep, you're good to go. We definitely would want you to let us know if there's some kind of change, and that would need to happen kind of before the screening form due date.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great question. Thank you. So again, this information will be kept the same and copied over. Okay, so this is the first page that is new and specific to the grant application. So this is where you would add your answers here. And again, you can save progress, go back to them, check them. And I am just choosing to go through the pedestrian bicycle project track. Obviously, there are 3 options, but I'm just going to show this one just because it's the longest one and most common. And then again, the sponsor will have to just go through these. This is essentially specific to the application and the criteria evaluation. I think the other two tracks only have a page of those criteria evaluations questions. And then we go back to project readiness, which again is saved from your screening form information, as well as funding requests and the financial or the cost information and the financial documentation information. And then this last part is asking for any other considerations. So this is maybe there is a document that just didn't really fit with any of the other places that we had an option to upload. You can put it here and kind of explain that. But again, it's also fine if that's not relevant to your project. And then at this point, you reach the final review page. So this is just a reminder for you to double check your work. And then you can hit submit. So at this point, PSRC will again, or you and PSRC will again receive a PDF of the copy of the grant application, and PSRC can start scoring that for you. And that is the process.
I'll add one thing here because the question does come up. If you submit your application well in advance of the deadline and then determine that, oh, I didn't mean to hit submit, or hey, we've got some information that we want to do differently, as long as you're before the application deadline, if you reach out to us, we would be able to re-release it for you to make that update. We would not be able to make, we can't accommodate that once the deadline has passed. But before the deadline, we can, if you accidentally submit, we can reverse that for you.
I will stop sharing the screen unless there's a relevant question. I need to show something.
We do have a question about letters of support being considered as part of the project evaluation. I think the letters of support, kind of making your case for kind of consistency, it doesn't hurt to include letters of support if you have them. They're not something that is kind of maybe another information, piece of information, which may be what prompted your question. So you're certainly welcome to provide any letters of support as part of your application. I think that would go potentially under other considerations. It could also be showing some of that policy plan consistency, or just kind of consistency with other jurisdictions as appropriate for your project as well.
Great. Thanks for answering that one, Jennifer. And thanks for the demo, Mitch. At this point, we're just happy to take any questions that people might have that we haven't already covered. Oh, okay. Jim Storman's got our first question.
I wanted to explore this thought a little bit more of projects that have additional elements or that may be part of larger projects. Some of our candidates may fall into that gray area that Jennifer was describing. And one example I can think of is a new bike facility that would be placed in an existing parking lane. And so it's not a traditional road diet, but it's not exactly a standalone facility either. Would require some improvements between the curb lines, so to speak. So I wanted to find out what our next step would be if we have several of these types of candidates that we want to explore. I want to be cautious of sending over a lot of screening forms to do that, but I also, I'm not sure if there's a better way to approach this. Maybe earlier emails with your team or that sort of thing, where we could show you some of our project concepts and get your perspectives early on. Is that viable? And if so, who would we want to send those questions to?
I guess my first suggestion is to complete a screening form, because that gives us the complete information. And I guess, Jim, I'm hoping you would keep your list kind of, with the amount of funds that we have available in mind. So, yes. We're happy to have that conversation. I would say if you've got some that are clearly, TAP eligible versus I'm not so sure about this one, like maybe kind of look through that lens as you make your short list. But yeah, I mean, we're happy to talk to you about specific. I mean, we have spent, it can be a bit of a rabbit hole. If there's a question that we ultimately have to request to FHWA, then it can take some time to get that,
Sure.
to get that verification. And this is the source of funds where that are the most challenging. So so we're happy to have the conversation. If you have some that are like clearly TAP eligible versus I'm not so sure about this one, I'd like to have that conversation of how you're picking kind of your two applications to move forward. But I guess short answer is we are yes, we're happy to have that conversation with you.
Thanks.
And Jennifer, for the next question, I meant to just type a response to this, but I hit the wrong button. So we'll just ask it. But it is a simple question. Applicant doesn't have CA status. They've relied on WashDOT in the past. Do we recommend they reach out to their local programs office to request that confirmation that we're looking for?
Yes, yeah, that's it. That's absolutely who I'd recommend you reach out to. And WashDOT is appreciative that we request this because they need to know when they've been identified as CA sponsor as well. So, but yes, if you contact your local programs rep, or if you don't know who your local programs rep is, contact us. We can direct you to that person. But that is who I would start with.
Perfect. Okay, any other questions? Covered some good ones here already. Give it another minute here. Okay. Well, here's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us as you get going. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks.